Last summer, I tracked my garden hours in a notebook for the entire season, and I came in at just under 60 hours of total work for a 30 by 40-foot plot that produced more tomatoes, beans, squash, and greens than my wife and I could eat or give away. The year before, growing the same garden the conventional way, I logged 122 hours and ended up with less food. Half the work, more food. That's not a typo, and it's not luck. The conventional approach has us weeding every weekend, dragging hoses around in the heat, hauling compost from a far corner of the yard, staking and tying and pruning every few days. You work harder every year, and the garden seems to demand more, not less. Then a few summers back, I started spending more time around the Amish farms near Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, watching how my neighbor Daniel and his sons ran a half-acre kitchen garden that fed a family of 11, and I realized something that genuinely reset my thinking. They were doing less work than I was, not because they were cutting corners, because they had designed the work out of the system. Today I'm going to walk you through the 10 Amish hacks that cut my garden labor roughly in half. And stick around to the end because I'll share a transplanting trick Daniel showed me that doubles the speed at which a tomato plant establishes itself. I've never seen it in a single American gardening book. I'll be honest with you, I gardened the conventional way for close to 30 years before I started paying attention. I was a high school science teacher, so I figured if anyone should be able to read a soil book and a seed packet and put it together, it ought to be me. But I was working myself ragged every July and August, watering twice a day in a heat wave, weeding on my hands and knees every Saturday, hauling pickup loads of compost in the spring. If you're doing any of that right now, you're not doing anything wrong. You're doing exactly what the gardening books told us all to do. The Amish just never read those books, and they figured out something better. There's a guiding principle in Old Order Amish life called Gelassenheit, pronounced Gelassenheit, and it roughly means yielding to the natural order. For the Amish, this isn't a poetic idea. It's practical necessity. When you're feeding 10 or 12 people from limited acreage, with no rototiller, no irrigation system, and no synthetic fertilizer, you cannot afford to fight the garden. You have to design a garden that mostly takes care of itself because the family's labor is needed in a dozen other places at the same time. Every hack I'm about to share with you comes from that pressure. It's not philosophy. It's what works when nobody has time for busy work. The first hack is deep mulching. Daniel keeps 6 to 8 inches of straw on every bed, every season, year-round. Not 2 inches, not a thin layer, a serious blanket. The reason this works comes down to soil biology and physics. 6 inches of straw blocks, 95% of weed germination, holds soil moisture for days longer than bare ground, and feeds the worms and microbes underneath as it breaks down from below. I cut my weeding time from about 3 hours a week down to maybe 20 minutes, and I water roughly half as often. Lay it down right after your soil warms in spring and top it up once midsummer. In USDA zones 3 through 5, pull the mulch back about a foot from each plant for the first 2 weeks after transplanting so the soil can warm. In zones 7 through 9, leave it tight against the plants to keep roots cool. The second hack is living pathways. Most of us walk on bare dirt between our rows, and we spend hours hoeing those paths all summer. The Amish plant white Dutch clover in their pathways, sown thick at about 1/4 pound of seed per 100 square feet of path. Clover chokes out weeds, fixes nitrogen into the soil, stays low enough to walk on, and you mow it twice a season with a push mower or a scythe. The clippings get raked right onto the beds as free mulch. No more hoeing paths ever. The third hack is chop and drop. Instead of hauling spent plants and prunings to a compost pile across the yard, the Amish cut them into 6 to 8 inch pieces with hand pruners and dropped them right onto the bed where they grew. The material breaks down in place over 4 to 6 weeks and feeds the soil exactly where the next crop will go. I used to spend 2 full Saturdays every fall hauling corn stalks and tomato vines to the compost heap. Now I spend about 40 minutes with a pair of loppers, and the bed is fed for next season. The fourth hack is what Daniel calls the volunteer corner. Every Amish garden I visited has a small section, usually 4 feet by 4 feet at one end of the plot, where they let a few plants go fully to seed every year. Dill, cilantro, lettuce, arugula, calendula. Those seeds drop, overwinter, and come up on their own the next spring with no work from you. I haven't bought lettuce or dill seed in 4 years. The volunteers come up earlier and stronger than anything I'd transplant because they self-selected for my exact soil and climate. The fifth hack is block planting instead of long rows. Conventional gardens are planted in single rows with 2 or 3 feet between them, which means lots of bare ground that has to be weeded and watered. The Amish plant in dense blocks, 4 to 5 plants across, with the plants close enough that their leaves touch at maturity. A canopy forms within 3 weeks, and that canopy shades out weeds and conserves moisture. For lettuce and greens, space plants 6 inches apart in a grid. For bush beans, 4 inches. For broccoli, 18 inches. The yield per square foot goes up, and the work per square foot goes way down. If this is the kind of practical, time-tested approach you want more of, take a second to subscribe. I publish these deep dives into traditional gardening wisdom every week, and I read every comment. All right, let's keep going. The sixth hack is what Daniel's wife Anna calls one good soak. Most of us water lightly every day or two, which trains plant roots to stay shallow and keeps us tied to the hose all summer. The Amish water deeply once a week, soaking the bed until the water has reached a depth of about 8 inches. You can check this by pushing a screwdriver into the soil. If it slides in easily, you're deep enough. Deep watering drives roots down where the soil stays moist for days, and it cuts your watering time roughly in half. In zones 7 through 9 in the heat of August, you may need to water twice a week. In cooler zones, once every 10 days is often plenty if you're mulching deeply. The seventh hack is the milk jug reservoir. Daniel sinks an empty gallon milk jug with a few small holes punched in the bottom and lower sides into the ground next to each tomato, pepper, and squash plant at planting time. The next stays above the soil. Once a week, you fill the jug with a hose or a watering can, and it slowly releases water directly to the root zone over the next 24 hours. Almost zero evaporation, almost zero waste, and you can water 20 plants in about 10 minutes. I built ours from jugs I'd been throwing in the recycling bin for years. The eighth hack is the single-stake tomato. Most of us spend half the summer wrestling cages and tying up sprawling tomato plants. The Amish prune indeterminate tomatoes to a single main stem and tie that stem to one 6-foot wooden stake driven 18 inches into the ground. You pinch out every sucker that forms in the joint between the main stem and a branch every week with your fingers. It takes about 30 seconds per plant. The plant puts all its energy into fewer, larger fruits. The airflow is better, so disease pressure drops, and you never untangle a cage again. The conventional approach is to let the plant sprawl and try to corral it. The Amish approach is to make the plant grow up on purpose in one direction. The ninth hack is the cold ash dusting. Instead of spraying for cabbage worms and flea beetles on brassicas, Daniel keeps a coffee can of cooled, sifted wood ash from his stove next to the garden gate. Once a week in the early morning when the leaves are still wet with dew, he sprinkles a light dusting of ash across cabbage, broccoli, kale, and turnip greens. The ash sticks to the wet leaves and makes them gritty and unpalatable to soft-bodied caterpillars and beetles. It also adds potassium and trace minerals to the soil when it rinses off. One coffee can last most of the season. The 10th hack is the seed and tool station. Every Amish garden I've been in has a small covered shelf or a wooden box at the garden's edge where every tool, every packet of seed, every length of twine, and every pair of gloves lives. Nothing goes back to the barn or the shed. When you walk into the garden, everything you need is already there. I used to lose 10 or 15 minutes of every gardening session walking back and forth to the garage looking for pruners or string. Now, I lose none. Let me share a few patterns I see in conventional gardens that the Amish approach quietly fixes. No judgment here. I did every one of these myself for a long stretch of years. The first pattern is overtilling. Most of us were taught to rototill the garden every spring, and many folks till again in the fall. Tilling destroys soil structure, kills earthworms, and brings buried weed seeds to the surface where they sprout by the thousands. The Amish till once when they break new ground, and rarely again. They build soil from the top down with mulch and chop and drop, less work, better soil. The second pattern is hauling compost from far away. We dump kitchen scraps in a pile 50 yards from the garden, then haul the finished compost back. The Amish compost in place, chop and drop, sheet mulching. Animal bedding spread directly on beds in fall. The compost happens where it's needed. The third pattern is daily light watering. We feel productive watering every evening, but we're actually training shallow roots and creating dependence. The Amish water deeply and infrequently, and their plants are tougher for it. The fourth pattern is buying everything new every year. New seeds, new cages, new sprays. The Amish save seed from their best plants, reuse stakes for 10 or 15 seasons, and make their own pest deterrents from kitchen and stove byproducts. The garden costs almost nothing to run once it's established. Now, here's the bonus I promised at the start, the one I learned from Daniel one June afternoon. When he transplants tomatoes, he doesn't dig a deep hole and stand the seedling up in it. He digs a shallow trench about 4 inches deep and 8 to 10 inches long. He pinches off all the lower leaves of the seedling, leaving only the top 3 or 4, and lays the entire stem horizontally in the trench, gently bending the top up so it stands above the soil. Then he covers the buried stem with soil. Within a week, roots form along every inch of that buried stem, giving the plant 5 times the root mass of a conventionally transplanted tomato. The plant establishes in roughly half the time, needs less water, and stands stronger in wind. I've used this method on every tomato I've planted for 3 seasons now, and the difference in vigor is dramatic. It costs nothing, takes 30 extra seconds per plant, and saves you weeks of watering and babying. If any of these hacks change how you think about your garden, I'd love to hear which one you try first. Drop a comment and let me know your zone and what you're planting this year. And if you want more of these deep dives into Amish, Pennsylvania Dutch, and other traditional growing methods that most modern gardening books skip right over, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. That 60 hours of garden time last season included a lot of slow mornings with coffee, watching the bees work the clover paths, and the volunteer dill come up in the corner. The Amish figured out a long time ago that a good garden shouldn't run you ragged. It should feed you, and it should give you back some peace while it does. Thanks for spending time with me today. I'll see you in the next one.